Hello, my name is Brian Meacham. I'm leading the Reimagining the ICC project for the International Code Council, and I'd like to offer this introduction to the research initiative and to the forthcoming roundtable discussions. What I want to cover in this session is a little bit about myself so you know why I'm running this project and what I bring to it and what we're trying to accomplish here. I'll talk a bit about what the research project is that we've entitled Reimagining the ICC-PC, which is the ICC Performance Code for Buildings and Facilities. I'll give you an overview of the research effort, talk about what we did with an initial survey, give you an overview of the roundtable series that we're going to hold, and talk about the plans for a workshop to be held at the end of the roundtable series. So just a couple of comments about myself to provide some context. I've been involved in performance-based design for fire and with performance-based building codes since the middle 1990s. I served on the original code development committee for the ICC Performance Code for buildings and facilities in the 1990s. I undertook research that defined the performance-based design process for fire when I was technical director and research director of the Society of Fire Protection Engineers in the 90s. And I've been conducting research on risk as a basis for performance and advancement of performance-based design for the last 30 years or so. I've served on numerous codes and standards making committees. I've mentioned ICC, also the National Fire Protection Association, and the International Organization for Standardization. And so I'm familiar with a number of the processes used by these entities. I've also consulted to and or have served on expert panels in a number of countries, including Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Scotland, Singapore, and Sweden, as well as being a senior consultant to the World Bank in their building regulation for resilience program. In much of these consulting projects, it's been looking at regulatory structures, the use of performance in building regulations, and in some cases, more of a focus on fire. Given my experience in different countries with performance systems, both the design and regulation, I was invited to lead this research effort for the ICC to think about, what a reimagined ICC performance code might look like into the future. And so, as a little bit of context, the ICC Performance Code for Buildings and Facilities was initially developed in the period of 1996 to 2000. There have been some updates over the years, but to many extent, those have been focused on fixing a few small issues and providing some correlation to the IBC and other areas, but not really a wholesale rethinking about the performance-based code, how it might be used, how it's structured, and whether it's really the best in class, as it were, here in 2021. And much has happened in the areas of performance-based building codes and design since 2000, both in the USA and internationally. And in fact, in many countries that have had performance-based building codes in place since the 1980s and 1990s, they've gone through many iterations in terms of looking at the structure, thinking about how various aspects such as performance criteria, use of verification methods, use of peer review are used. And we haven't arguably done the same level of thinking about the ICC performance code. So it was determined that it would make sense to kind of look at the current structure of the ICC performance code in light of what's been done with performance-based building codes in other countries, to have a look at what some recent and emerging issues and trends are, how well they're considered in the ICC PC or not, what advancements have been made in performance-based design and other innovations, and see if it makes sense to, have a broader look at restructuring the ICC performance code. And so I've been leading this effort, and as a first step, I've provided some benchmarking in terms of what other countries have been doing based on my experience with them. In addition, it was felt to be worthy to do a survey of the current stakeholders, primarily in the US, but more broadly, to have a sense of what the current market thinks about performance-based codes and design methods. This will be followed up by a series of roundtable discussions in which we'll get into more detail about performance codes, performance-based design, what the positives are, where the gaps are, and so forth, and really try to put together what might be considered a global best practice performance-based building code structure with consideration of the supporting infrastructure. And by supporting infrastructure, I mean things such as competency and qualifications, data for performance verification, analysis, the different methodologies, and so forth. And some of that is also discussed in another presentation as part of this series that gives a little bit of history and context to performance-based codes, and a little bit on the design side as well. So the roundtable sessions that are going to be held in the months of October and November are comprised of small groups of people from different sectors, such as architects, fire protection engineers, structural engineers, building officials, fire officials, and so forth. The aim is to just have 8 or 10 people representing different aspects of those disciplines to have a discussion of their perspectives, what they see as gaps and needs. And just to do it within the discipline or within the area, to have kind of a focused discussion on that particular aspect, say performance-based engineering design, or separately building officials in how they look at review of performance-based design. So the aim of these roundtables is to collect input on really what are the views or perceptions of performance-based codes and design, where we see gaps in the current practice, what activities are underway, and what are different items that need to be addressed. Once this roundtable series is completed, the intent is to have a larger workshop where representatives from the roundtables and the broader community can come together and work through perhaps a outline for what a future reimagined ICC PC might look like, and what the supporting infrastructure would be needed. And all of this is really aimed at trying to just get some research to understand if there's going to be a development project in the future, what should it include? What might we want to look at in the process? There have been some questions about, why this research is being undertaken now and what we hope to achieve. And some of this is answered in the frequently asked questions section on the website. But in the short answer is there's been increasing interest from various stakeholder groups in the US, particularly the design community and development groups, trying to think about whether we can go to more performance-based design in the future. In addition, there are some groups working with low and middle income countries that see opportunities for having a performance code that would help bring structure to the regulatory approach in different countries. And so the idea is, in looking at the best in class, what's being done around the world, could a reimagined ICC PC be developed in a way that would help both the US jurisdictions that look to adopt it, as well as jurisdictions in other places in the world. And there are some benefits to going performance globally in terms of not being tied to imperial units, offering flexibility and reference standards and so forth. And some of this may be of interest to stakeholders in the US as well as internationally. So it just seemed to make sense to look at these types of issues as we go ahead. In addition, there have been new, call them essential elements or societal goals that have emerged that one might expect to see in any modern building code. Sustainability, for example, resilience, issues of indoor air quality, renewable energy sources, alternative energy storage systems, novel building materials, and so forth. While some of these arguably were considered in the performance structure of the initial ICC-PC, the focus was really more on structure and fire, and some of these issues like sustainability and resilience really weren't on the agenda and aren't addressed very well. So we need to consider what society is looking for and to make sure the goals and objectives are current with, what the current issues are today, as well as what the trends indicate the direction might be in the future. Likewise, the code was structured back in 2000 to consider what was state of the art and practice of structural engineering and fire safety engineering and others at the time. And that's changed over 20 years. So now it's really important to look at where we have advanced in performance-based methodologies. What is the current state, for example, in energy performance that didn't exist really at the time when the ICC Performance Code was originally developed? And what should be overall encompassed within performance-based building code going forward? So in thinking about that, the research objectives of the project are really to understand the current thinking and perspectives across numerous disciplines and stakeholder groups, from design to enforcement, materials and systems, to performance evaluation and testing, to really understand how performance-based codes and design are viewed, what can be done to make them more robust and achieve a high level of confidence in their use. What's the current state of design approaches, tools, methods, and data, and what's coming down the road that might be considered, and what is really needed in terms of qualifications and competency for people who are undertaking designs, verification, review, and approval of these designs, and are there mechanisms like peer review or other that would be helpful to, again, raise confidence in the approaches. So understanding that thinking and where we might go is really important. And then taking that to outline what the essential components and structure might be for a reimagined performance code that would embody what we're thinking in the US, global experience and best practice, the emerging and existing societal expectations, and what we might look to have as a world-class code structure in the future. So that's an overview to the overall effort. What I also want to talk about in this presentation is what the roundtable discussions are all about. So these are primarily intended to be information gathering, or as I look at them, learning sessions in which the participants are invited to provide their perspective on a range of topics associated with performance-based building codes and design. It's not easy to include everyone, but an attempt has been made to get a broad cross-section of views. Also, we plan to record these and make them available so other people can look at it and add their comments and perspectives through the LinkedIn chat session section or other modes. Also, it's not easy to include all disciplines, so we're really trying to focus in on a few sectors, at least in this research stage, including architects, building and fire officials, engineers, developers and managers, and people thinking about sustainability and resilience issues. So the first roundtable is really focused on getting kind of a baseline perception. And so 10 questions have been kind of outlined, and I don't really expect it will go through these question by question, person by person, but more have a discussion around these themes, really trying to understand how these different groups and people represented view performance-based building codes and performance-based design, their level of experience and how that influences their perspectives. Do current stakeholders in the US think that the ICC-PC, as it currently is structured, meets the need in terms of defining goals, performance measures, verification of performance, and so forth? And what is really the state of readiness of the profession to undertake and or review performance-based designs given the current design guidance, review guidance, and so forth? Also, what are the biggest challenges faced in getting acceptance of performance-based codes and performance-based design? This is important in the US, for example, because the ICC-PC is not adopted as a code in many jurisdictions, and performance-based design is done through the alternatives, methods and materials clause in the IBC. And could there be more done to make both the code and the design more readily accepted? As part of this, what do the participants think or see as the biggest opportunities currently being missed by not having more performance-based approaches? But also, what are any critical aspects that we have to make sure we address for any performance code that would be developed into the future? And kind of bringing that down to, what do you see as your top 3 items that must be addressed for a successful reimagined ICC-PC and performance environment in the future? And how well do you see your group, the different group that we'll be talking about in the different roundtables, really think about their readiness to go forward in a performance environment? So that's the overall aims for the first roundtable. The idea for the second roundtable is to get into more technical or structural issues. And this gets into issues like what would be the most appropriate way to define goals, functional objectives, and performance requirements. Are different approaches needed based on different aspects of the building regulation? For example, how much different is energy performance from structural performance, from fire to safety and use to safety with sanitary and plumbing systems? So talking around what it means to have performance, how it would be measured, how it would be verified. Should we be using risk as a basis for establishing performance requirements in terms of structure, fire, and other safety issues? And if so, why? And if not, why not? Should performance requirements have quantified performance criteria? There aren't really quantified performance values in the current ICC-PC. Is that something that should change? If we think we should have them, where do they come from? Who should develop them? How do we get them into the code document in the future? Thinking also about quantified metric, should quantified risk values be considered performance metrics as well? And if so, should those be included? Also, a question in many countries is, should the engineering methods, performance-based design methods, or the means of verification, do they have to be mandated or required by the code? Or to what degree can non-mandatory means be acceptable, and how do you control for that? Likewise, is it required to have mandated acceptable solutions, which would be compliance documents, or can other types of compliance documents be developed outside of the regulatory development process and deemed appropriate for use? And should there be some minimal competency qualifications requirements over and above the current requirements? And to what extent, if any, should peer review be built into the system and how it should be managed? So quite a few kind of big picture questions, but also trying to get to the detail of, how you would effectively design and ultimately review and approve performance-based design. So again, it's intended to record and post the roundtable discussions for everyone to look at. And following the roundtables, a report will be developed which summarizes the key issues. From this, it's also expected to propose an outline for a potential reimagined ICC performance code. Then the aim is to bring together the participants from the roundtable sessions and perhaps others to have a large workshop that talks then about what the structure for or outline for reimagined ICC PC might look like, what it might include, what level of detail is appropriate, the supporting infrastructure, and so forth, to be able to kind of set a basis for any future effort should it be decided to go forward. So the outcomes of the research initiative on reimagining the ICC performance code is really going to be the set of roundtable discussion recordings, workshop recordings and report, and the development of a summary findings and recommendations report that I'll submit to the ICC Board of Directors for their consideration. Once the research effort is completed, any future actions will be at the decision of the ICC board. And so that this intent overall of this effort is to see where we're at, see what's needed, provide input to help with any such decision going forward. So that's a quick overview of the initiative, the roundtables, the planned workshop, and the outcomes. If you have questions or comments, you can look at the Reimagining the ICC Performance Code website that you can find through ICC. It's available here as well. And you can email at performance@iccsafe.org. Thank you very much.